From Software has done it again. The reviews for the Elden Ring DLC Shadow of the Erdtree are out, and naturally everyone loves it. Not that the review scores matter that much. Elden Ring is a very special title, and it's looking like Miyazaki and his team poured their all into making the best DLC they could possibly make. And so in today's video I want to talk about From Software's approach to this DLC, what kind of big changes are they making and what you can expect to see. But I will of course be careful not to show you any spoiler content, as all of the footage that I will be using will be from one of the first trailers, along with some early game gameplay kindly provided by Rurikhan. A big thank you to the lovely old man. And finally, I also want to talk about how From Software is separating themselves and doing everything that the other AAA companies are not doing. With that being said, hello everyone, my name is Dark Hero and let's get started. So I think it's safe to state that Elden Ring is one of the greatest games of all time. It certainly is one of my favorites despite its many obvious flaws. And so faced with the task of making a DLC to one of the greatest games ever made, Miyazaki and From Software have quite a lot of expectations that they need to meet. Thankfully, From Software's track record is pretty clean for the most part, and when it comes to DLCs, evidently everyone seems to enjoy them. And it's important to mention the way that From Software is going about making this DLC, because in today's day and age, it is simply rare that a single player game, despite having a few online components, ends up receiving a single purchase DLC that is the size of a massive expansion. I mean, just think about it, from everything that we have heard from everyone about Shadows of the Erdtree, this DLC is taking on the style and format of the old expansions that we used to get with so many games, and they are really trying to pack in as much content as they can in this single time purchase. From Software is not trying to nickel and dime you and trying to get every single penny out of you. They don't have a battle pass, they're not selling emotes or anything like that, and they don't even have pre-order bonuses or an expensive version of the game that they are selling that will give you some consumables, some extra weapons, or any form of a head start. They are really keeping it grounded and trying to give us, the consumers, the best product that they can make. And Miyazaki has reportedly stated that the DLC is going to be the same size as the region of Limgrave, but from all of the content creators and reviewers that got the chance to play through the entirety of the DLC, all of them have come back after finishing the game and said that it's actually 3 or 4 times the size of Limgrave. That is how densely packed this DLC is going to be. So it's going to be a joy to leave the lands between and explore this new area that is going to offer us a ton of challenges, beautiful vistas, magnificent castles, and maybe even a poison swamp or two. Everything that we have seen from the Land of Shadow looks absolutely amazing, and I believe that we're going to be getting 2 to 3 large classic dungeons, and they are going to be a lot of fun to explore, as we didn't have a lot of them in the base game in my opinion. And of course, we're also going to be getting the caves, the dungeons, and the tunnels that we're going to be able to explore, which will give you a breather from all of the exploration and will give you a side of fun with perhaps a challenging boss at the end. Now sadly, it's been confirmed that we're going to be getting a few repeat bosses in the DLC, much like we had in the base game. Personally, I don't mind this too much, and keep in mind that Shadow of the Erdtree is a DLC after all, so it makes sense that there is going to be this connective issue that is essentially a few enemies that you saw already in the base game. Now, one thing that I am particularly very excited about is the 8 new weapon types that we're going to be able to try once we get our hands on the DLC. I am of course referring to the Beast Claws and the hand-to-hand arts, the Great Katanas and the Light Greatswords, all the throwing weapons and the thrusting shields, as well as the perfume bottles and the reverse hand swords. Now, out of all of these weapons, the one that I am the most interested in is by far the Light Greatsword. I really feel like this type of weapon was missing from the base game, and it toes the line between having a weapon that is essentially a big slab of iron for you to hit your enemies with, but at the same time you can still be very elegant and flashy with it. And I would be lying if I were to tell you that I'm not interested in the reversed hand swords, as well as the throwing weapons or the hand-to-hand arts. Because dude, I have to tell you, it's gonna feel great to beat all of the DLC, and then return to Malenia and try to beat her by throwing hands. Now, still on the topic of those new shiny weapons, Miyazaki has even gone out of his way to mention that, quote, "The new weapon classes aren't necessarily clearly better than the existing weapon classes, so I don't think players are going to feel a drastic or insurmountable change in the difficulty curve of the base game just because they have access to these new weapons." Now, might some of these weapons be better against certain bosses? Perhaps. Naturally, the increase in variety may lend itself to new strategies that people who don't have the DLC may not be exposed to. Of course, my desire is that everyone experience the DLC, but barring that, I think the experience won't be that jarring. End quote, with the final part being exclusively when talking about the PvP. Now, some of the reviewers whose articles I have seen have mentioned that they have been able to clear the entire game by just using the base game weapons, with the examples given being, for example, the Gargoyle's Black Blade or the infamous Blasphemous Blade, but in general you will be able to play in any way that you want. I am very likely going to be doing a few challenge runs here on the channel where I try to get these weapons the earliest that I can and then make an entire playthrough where I only use the new weapons. But having said that, we will of course be using these new weapons and new weapon arts against of course the new bosses. And some of them that we have been able to see from the trailers look absolutely fantastic. And reportedly the final boss of the Elden Ring DLC is one of the most difficult out of the entire From Software franchise, so I am very much looking forward to seeing how much time I'm going to spend beating my hand against the wall and eventually pull through. Now, on the topic of how I'm going to be tackling each of the different bosses in the DLC, I'm going to be doing all of my playthrough entirely by myself, playing solo, and I'm not going to be summoning any NPCs, but I am wondering if I'm going to be using the Mimic tier, because one of these new level up mechanics that are going to be introduced in the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC are going to allow you to strengthen your summons. And honestly, that sounds pretty cool as it opens up the door for some cool and unique builds that you can come up with. For example, if you have played Dragon's Dogma 2, I am totally picturing a trickster style playstyle where instead of directly dealing damage to the enemy, you focus on trying to empower your summons to deal more damage. But maybe that is not going to be viable, and so your summon is just going to be something that you add to make things a little bit easier, and is overall ultimately not a very engaging mechanic, and if that is the case, then I am likely going to skip on using the Mimic tier. For my first playthrough of the base game, I tried to not use the summons for anything, but I ended up using the Mimic tier for a couple of bosses, like Radagon and Malenia. But other than those two, I think I beat the entire game without using them just because it felt more satisfying to me personally. Ultimately, it's your own game, it's your own experience, and I don't think that using summons is going to rob from your experience. But of course, if you, like myself, find enjoyment in not using that mechanic, then of course go ahead and ignore it, which is something that I did for the entire of Lies of P, for example. Now, when it comes to the DLC, a big question that a lot of people brought up was, how exactly is the leveling system going to work? And thankfully, we are getting a brand new leveling system in the DLC where we're going to be able to enter the Shadowlands at pretty much any level, and because you will have this new resource that you can level up to increase your different stats, pretty much everyone will be on an equal field when it comes to the DLC, which sounds fantastic because I want to get as much exploration done as I possibly can, because much like with my first playthrough of the base game, I really want to see everything and I don't want to miss anything. Now, I know that many of you are curious about what kind of build I'm going to be rocking with in the DLC, and me personally, I'm thinking of going with a quality build because more likely than not, having a mix of strength and dexterity is going to allow me to wield most of the weapons of the DLC, and the ones that require faith, intelligence, and arcane, I can likely tap into those weapons and still be able to wield them without a lot of investment. That being said, I'm going to be putting a few extra points into arcane just so that I am able to boost my item discovery and be able to find a few more rare drops. And I promise you, the moment that the DLC hits, I'm going to be looking out for every single type of weapon that I can find, and I promise I'll try to keep things spoiler free as much as I can, so don't worry, I will not post the final boss fight of the DLC, but if there is a cool weapon, I will show you how to get it. And as I said before, I will also be doing a lot of challenge runs on my Dark Hero channel, as a lot of you guys enjoyed my Tears of the Kingdom challenge run where I only played as Ganon. So if you guys like that type of content as well, I will be making more of that. I hope you guys are all as excited as I am for the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC. Elden Ring really is one of my favorite games of all time, and I never got to cover it here on the channel before, so I will be doing my best to cover as much of it as I can with the DLC. Let me know which builds you guys are going to be using, and with that being said, thank you all so much for watching. My name is Dark Hero, and as always, happy hunting!